This is part 2 of the Craftsman Atlas Head and Table Lift Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 1, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we're going to be cleaning, masking, priming, and painting. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. First thing we're going to be doing is wire wheeling a bunch of these parts. And even though we used paint stripper on a lot of it, there's still some remnant paint on some of these parts. And this brass wire wheel on a grinder will pull all of that off. And it'll help to clean up the parts as well. So here I have the threaded end collar. And you can see some of the paint on there, but that wire wheel takes it right off. And this is the gearbox. Same thing. Just going to wire wheel the entire exterior of it. And this is the gearbox cover that the crank handle actually protrudes through. And this is one of the lock handle screws. And this is the long 3/4 inch Acme thread rod. And that'll be a wrist workout, turning that all the way through. So after all those parts were cleaned up on the wire wheel, then I coat them all with penetrating oil. This is super slick stuff. You can get it at Ace or some of your big box stores. And then after we've coated all these parts, they will get wiped down with a rag so that they're not dripping with the super slick stuff. We're not going to do that to any of the parts that are getting painted though. So the next thing is I'm just using a brass wire bottle brush to clean out the bores in all of these parts. I've got a couple different sizes of these brushes, so I can get into a lot of the bores. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to mask all the parts that are getting painted. And you can see I've got those 2 column collars on the table as well. They're not actually part of this, but I'm going to paint them at the same time. And so we're going to mask off all of the bores and any of the machined areas that are not going to get painted. And the hand part of the crank, the handle itself, is going to get masked off as well. I thought about painting it, but I think the paint will just wear off, so we're going to leave it raw metal. And I believe it came from the factory as raw metal anyways. And you can see that tray of silicone plugs that I have on the table as well. I use those for gunsmithing, but they work out great to plug a bunch of these bores as well. So I just take my time, try to get the masking as minimal as possible so that the tape doesn't block any of the paint or primer when I apply it. And the more time you spend on this prep work, the easier the painting is going to be. But that's the threaded collar. And on the gearbox, the inside bores for the gear and the rod have a machined area on the inside of that box as well. So I'm cutting out some circles of masking tape that are the right size, and then I'll apply that to those inside areas. You can kind of see it here. But getting in there with an X-Acto knife to try to cut around that would have been a real pain in the butt. And since it's round, it's easy just to cut a circle. And for any of these bores that are too big for the plugs that I have, I'm just going to have to mask off the inside of them like I do with this one. Once the masking is done, it's time to go ahead and start priming these parts. I'm using a Rust-Oleum metal etching primer. This is the primer I use for pretty much all my projects, and it works out great. I'll just apply one coat of this, and then I'll let these parts dry, depending on humidity, somewhere between 10 minutes and 30 minutes. And I've found it's just easier to go ahead and do the interior of the parts first. That way, if we get any buildup on the outside of the part, we can fix that and then shoot the exterior of the part altogether. So like I said, we'll let this sit for between 10 and 30 minutes, and then it's time to go ahead and paint the parts. And the paint I'm using is the same paint I use for all of the tools that I keep, which is Rust-Oleum hammered gold finish. This is a hammered metallic paint. I just like the way it looks, and it holds up really well. And you saw the original paint that was on this when I did the unboxing and after I cleaned the parts in part 1 video. All of these came in a gray color, kind of a machinery gray. And there was, I believe, 2 different shades of gray that they came in, a lighter and a darker color. So I don't believe there was ever a power bronze version of this. So since I'm hanging these parts except for the gearbox, there won't be any need to do one half and then let it cure and then the other half. Should be able to shoot all of this at one time. And then we're going to let it cure for a couple of hours, again, depending on humidity and temperature. But once it's pretty dry to handle, then we're going to remove the masking. And so here we are a couple hours later. We're just going to pull the plugs on any of the parts that have plugs in them and then remove the masking tape. And then we're going to hang them back up and let them finish curing. I don't like to leave the masking tape on something that's painted overnight unless I have to. Sometimes when you go to remove that masking tape, if it's been on there for the whole cure time of the paint, it'll take some of that paint with it around the edges of the tape when you go to remove it. But if you remove it within a couple of hours of painting, gives you a nice crisp line. Now, if you're going to shoot more than one color, like on some of the drill presses and stuff that I've done, they're two-tone, then obviously you can leave the masking tape on. But like I said, I don't like to leave it on unless I have to. And as you can imagine, I go through masking tape, Q-tips, and paper towels like they're water. So as long as you take your time and, do your best not to scratch up any of the painted area, you should be okay. But if you do this, you're definitely going to want to hang the parts back up because that paint's not fully cured. And if you leave a part sitting on something, even this wax paper, when you come back tomorrow, that area that the wax paper is hitting it may not stick to the wax paper, but it will no longer have that hammered finish to it. Next, I'm going to repack this bearing, and for that I'm using this mobile grease. It's a mobile Polyrex bearing grease. And I did order some brand new nice bearings for this, but they haven't arrived yet. So we're going to repack this bearing. And like I said, the inner race is open, so I can get a bunch of grease in that inner bore and then use 2 fingers to compress that grease, and it presses it into the bearing itself. And then I can rotate the bearing, and I'll do that several times until the grease starts to come out around the seal. And once that's done, we'll just clean it up, and that bearing is ready to rock and roll. Next thing is cleaning off the patent number plate, and for that I'm just using this Meguiar's cleaner wax. I use this stuff on all the panels that I do for all of my tools. And you just apply it and then let it sit for about 10 or 15 minutes and then come back and buff it off. So it's been about 15 minutes, and here we're just going to buff it off with a paper towel. It had kind of a satin finish to it originally anyway, so if it was going to have a high shine to it, then I'd probably use a microfiber towel, but the paper towel was fine. But it cleans up the panels really nicely and gets them looking as good as they're going to get. Sometimes they'll look almost brand new. So the next thing is to reinstall that patent panel. And to do this, I'm going to be using number 2 drive screws, and they are 3/16 of an inch in length. You can get these from McMaster Car. These sometimes are called panel screws. Or panel rivets or drive rivets, but McMaster Car calls them drive screws. We'll just get them started in this panel. And then we're going to tap them in using a brass punch and a hammer. Once we've got them started, then we can seat them. And that is going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support. In the next video, hopefully we'll be finishing up this project. So as always, I will see you next time.